In the States, they call this thing miracle noodle, and they try to mix it in with like Western style dishes. So they'll try to say, oh, replace your pasta. You could put, tomato sauce and meatballs on it. You can turn it into, I guess, a mac and cheese. Like there's all these like weird, like Americanized recipes or like using these noodles, and I've tried them. I hate them. Today we're actually going to do a couple of Asian noodle recipes that are like really quick and easy, and also really low calorie and absolutely, well, almost zero carb. There is a product called Shirataki. I don't know if it's backwards because of the camera, but so Shirataki is a white yam noodle substitute. You can get them in pretty much any Asian grocery store. You can also get it at, like I bought this at Sprouts, Target, Walmart. Most of them will have this somewhere in like their Asian food section. But it is an absolutely zero, here's the information on there, 0 calories, 0 carbs, 0 sugar, 0 nutrition. It's got 20 milligrams of sodium, which is like super, super low. And really all it is a noodle that's just all fiber. 100%, your body doesn't even digest it. But I've seen a lot of recipes, like here in the States, they call it miracle noodle. And we've been using it in, definitely Japanese dishes, but we can use it in all sorts of Asian dishes since, I don't know, before the thousands, right? So thousands and thousands of years old. It's a noodle that doesn't dissolve. So we can actually put it in hot pots and things like sukiyaki, if you are into that in Japanese food. And basically it just sits there and just slowly absorbs all the flavors of the broth, and then you just eat it kind of at the end. What I found is it really does absorb broth flavors, and especially like soy sauce based flavors. It does that really, really well. And so for, if it's an Asian dish that's using noodles, it's actually a really good substitute. So you can use it for like a replacement instead of like the rice noodles in pho, or in those like Vietnamese spring rolls with the vermicelli noodles inside. You could replace them for Korean Japchae, and obviously any sort of like kind of soy-based dishes like yakisoba, that kind of stuff here. That's more Japanese based. Today we are going to make 2 versions because it's just me, and 1 pack is actually a whole serving for 1 person. So what you're supposed to do is, it's really easy to prepare these. And it's actually written on the back of the package, so it's really, really easy to understand. But it's a 3-step process. It's you just put it like in a colander and just rinse it with a whole bunch of water for like a couple of minutes. And then you put it in some boiling water for 3 minutes, and that kind of tightens all the fibers. And I guess there's a smell. Some people say, oh, if you boil it, then the smell comes out. To me, there's no smell. So, some people maybe have more sensitive sense to non-American dishes. Maybe that's what it is. And I don't notice it because I grew up with it. But anyway, so you rinse it really thoroughly with just running tap water. And you put it in hot water for like 3 minutes, and you kind of boil it, and then you just drain it. And then once that's done, this is what you get. And it's, it's pasta-ish noodles. It's got a chewy texture to it. So I would call it like al dente. But again, it's such a great like noodle texture. So if I'm really craving noodles and I don't, you know, want to do any of the weird kind of diety things, this is like such a great substitution, because like the texture tastes like pasta. I'm eating Japanese food and it just makes me happy. So now that I've already prepared the noodles and they're ready to go, and I have some other things here, I've got carrots and bean sprouts, I've got cabbage, just regular sweet yellow onions, green onions, ginger, garlic, and this is shaved beef. In Asia, especially like we have different kinds of thin sliced meats depending on where you are in the world. And in Japan, we have a couple, you know, we have really thin sliced meats for things like sukiyaki and shabu shabu, which is hot pot. They're not big chunky pieces of meat, and surprisingly, that's kind of hard to find in the States. You have to go to like an Asian market where they have that, and then you kind of hope that the Asian market has the right Asian food, because Korean, if you go to a Korean market and you go into their meat section, you're going to find meats that are sliced meant for things like Korean barbecue, right? So it's a little bit thicker, and so it's not quite as thin as you'd like, but it's still thinner than going and getting like a thin slice steak in like a regular American supermarket. What I found is shaved beef or like rare roast beef is actually a really good substitute. This I actually got at Trader Joe's, and it comes in a packet, says, you know, all natural shaved beef, and I think the normal use for it would be for things like cheesesteaks, and French dip sandwiches and things like that, right? But it's actually a really good substitute if you don't have like an Asian market in your hometown, or you can go to like Trader Joe's. If you can't go to Trader Joe's, you're gonna have to maybe, you know, talk to your butcher and see if they can do like a really, really thin sliced good piece of meat, or worst case scenario, just go and get a package of like super, super rare roast beef. It'll be saltier because it's already been seasoned, so you kind of have to adjust how you season when you're cooking, when you're using roast beef. But in a pinch is kind of a good substitute. So anyway, the other thing I want to talk about is this thing. So this is called a kondo, and a kondo is basically a tabletop stove. We use it all the time for things like hot pot, because you don't have to actually cook it in the kitchen and then bring out little pieces. You can actually put this right in smack in the middle of your coffee table, and everybody can kind of pick what they want. Or you can pick and have your little one-person hot pot while you're watching TV, which is what I do. So basically it's a, you know, a stovetop unit, like a regular stove, like a camping stove, I guess. And you can buy packs of these like cans of butane at like, I've always found like 5 packs of these at like the Asian market for like $10, I think. Maybe $10 is too much. I haven't easily found them in Western markets, but you could probably get them through Amazon, but I don't, or maybe like a camping goods store. Walmart might have them, you know, because they have like outdoor goods type stuff. RV and camping places might have them if you don't have an Asian market in your neighborhood. If you do have an Asian market, more than likely you're going to be able to find these. So cap off. You can see there's actually a little notch that's cut inside, and you line up the notch with this little sticking out part right here, and you get this lip in there. And then all you do is just kind of set it, right? Close this, and then there's a lever on the front side to try to get like a medium heat. You can add just a tiny bit of just regular vegetable oil. When I mean tiny, like just a couple drops, just to get on the pan. And then I'm doing 2 dishes, so I'm gonna use half. It's like the best sound. Hope you guys are having an awesome week so far. I'm going to put that aside. The first dish I'm gonna do is more of like my take on a Korean Japchae. Carrots and bean sprouts. Add a little salt. I didn't season the beef because I kind of wanted to stay fairly, you know, like just beef flavor. So my experience with Korean food and, you know, like going to Korean barbecues and things that I enjoy is the stuff that doesn't really have a lot of sauce. It's not really marinated. It's just, you know, pork belly, and you get like a little plate of sesame oil and some salt. And so I really enjoy that kind of just charcoal grill, unsauced, sliced beef kind of thing when I do Asian. So that's kind of what I'm going with here. Add a little pepper. Into that, we add our garlic. I don't like to put it right away in the beginning because I have a tendency, not everybody does, but I have a tendency to burn my garlic. So if I can put it in halfway through when there's other vegetables in there, then that's what works for me. So okay, so off for just a second. These tabletop grill tops, cooking tops, do get, to me, a little bit hotter. It's harder to adjust than like a regular gas stove for, you know, all the obvious reasons. It's not set up the same way. So, okay, so bean sprouts, carrots, salt, pepper, garlic. And that's all that I've got in there. And to that, I'm gonna add half my noodles. And this is like what I kind of see when I'm using these noodles with Asian dishes is, you know, when I do it with like tomato sauces or cheese, it just kind of slips off and then the noodle just looks white and doesn't look like it got absorbed at all, right? But if I do like a little soy, it seems to just actually get absorbed rather than sitting on top, which means that the noodle tastes better, you know? Like I said, super fast. You have to keep your eye definitely on the pan when you're using one of these tabletop things. You see how like the noodles completely change color? Like that doesn't happen when you use like Western style. There's got to be like some non-Asian dishes out there that I can use these noodles for. but I'm not sure. It smells so good. So happy with this. Oh, and there's one little thing that I forgot that I should get. So sesame seeds are huge in Korean cooking. I don't necessarily just keep sesame seeds around, but I have gomashio, which is sesame and salt. There's salt in here, so I have to be a little bit careful about how much I add. But sesame flavor is always a good addition when you're doing Korean, in my opinion. And then you double up on that with some sesame oil. Sesame oil is not meant to be cooked with. It's really just meant to be a flavoring agent. So you turn the heat off, and you just kind of drizzle on top. And sesame seed oil is really good for you. I'm gonna add the meat back in. It's got all sorts of vitamins. So I recommend having a little bit of sesame oil in your diet on a regular basis. And so yeah, this smells absolutely fantastic. Very sesame, oily, slightly kind of not very heavy on the soy sauce, but it's good stuff. And so that's one dish. So give me 1 second, let me plate this. Ooh. I may have gotten bowls that were too small. We'll see. The thing about the noodles is it really, because there's no calories or carbs or anything, you can, you know, whatever you add is whatever the caloric count is. So like in this case, it's really just beef, carrots, bean sprouts. That's it. That's kind of all of it when you talk about like what am I taking in terms of calories. So, you know, carrots are kind of negligible, bean sprouts are like 0. So it kind of depends on how much meat you want to put in there, you know. So that's our first dish. Let's start on our second. You can still use the same kind. And the reason I'm doing my Japanese version second is because it's a heavier sauce. It's more like a, Sukiyaki is close to like a broth that tastes like a teriyaki sauce broth, right? It's sweet, it's very soy saucy. It's not very oily at all. It's a little different from Japchae, which is kind of like a side dish. Sukiyaki is kind of like a meal that you have with like a bowl of rice. But if you're doing the lower calorie or the 0 carb or the low carb or the keto diet or whatever, or you're just kind of trying to keep your sugars down if you're diabetic, then these noodles work great for that, you know. So and they keep, because they don't ever get mushy, because it's just pure fiber. So you can keep it in the fridge, you can take it to work the next day, and your noodles won't ever taste mushy, you know. So and then you can choose if you're making like a little bento box, you can have that and then like a little side of rice, or you could just have that and it'd be completely low calorie and super nutritious, right? So I still have the sesame oil and some of the residual, obviously, flavors from the Japchae, which I'm gonna keep. We're gonna start up our kondol again. And add our second batch of beef. I know it sounds kind of lazy, but I've really found that it's gotten so much easier to find stuff that's already like shredded cabbage, shredded carrots, you know, bean sprouts. Like so much of the stuff requires so little actual manual prep work. You just buy bags, you know, and put them in little bowls so they're ready to go. I think the only thing that I actually had to use a knife for were the green onions and the sweet onions. And then I used a microplane for the ginger and garlic. And that's it. So it's a relatively easy dish to make, easy dishes to make. I think maybe in a later episode I'll try to do like a yakisoba And really the only difference, honestly, between this kind of sukiyaki style noodle dish and a yakisoba really is the noodles and the kind of vegetables and meat that you use. So sukiyaki is primarily beef, and because Japan is not a very big beef country, the thin sliced beef makes sense. It's really just there for flavor. You can always, westernize this by adding 2 or 3 times more beef, or a different kind of beef, or I don't know. Keep the noodles separate and make it just a giant steak. Do whatever, right? But our version involves cooking our beef. And in this case, I tend to want to cook it until it gets a little bit of caramelization. I'm going to let that sit there for a sec. And again, just a little bit of salt. I like a decent amount of pepper, so I'll go with that. Just a little bit more time because I wanted to get some, charred bits on there. It's a little different from how I make my version of Japchae, because with the sukiyaki version, because there's so much soy and it's more like a sauce than a, just a quick stir fry kind of thing. I want to be able to get some, color on the meat, because that'll actually help the soy sauce, the sukiyaki sauce, have a better flavor as well. Don't need that many onions, so. This is going to take a minute because, the best onions are slow cooked onions, so. And I think you'll also find that so many of these Japanese dishes are fairly inexpensive, but very filling and very nutritious. Not a lot of sauces, Here's the funny thing about Japanese flavors that make it really easy to kind of pick that up as a cooking habit is there really is a very, very short list of ingredients for things that we make. And it's soy sauce, miso. Let me start over. So it's soy sauce, mirin, which is a sake plus sugar concoction, kind of like a simple syrup but with sake. Sake itself, and that's your base, right? And then you have dashi, which is like a fish broth, and miso, which is a fermented soybean paste. Once you have that, and then you have salt, pepper, sugar, or sugar substitute, that's a pretty solid, I guess you could add like Japanese mayo, like Kewpie mayo, but once you have that, that's a pretty solid Japanese like flavoring pantry. And then you add, like the fresh herbs and spices and things like that. Well, not really spices, but ginger, garlic, onions, to go with different flavors. But that basic kind of soy sauce, mirin, sake, take that, add different varying degrees of water. If you add a dashi stock to those 3 ingredients, then you get something that tastes like a soba dipping broth, right? If you, or tempura broth. If you don't use the dashi broth, but you add sugar and you cook it down until it's kind of syrupy, then that becomes your teriyaki sauce, right? Then you can kind of play with it. You can go like, oh, I like in my case, I like my teriyaki sauce to be very gingery, so I actually keep a lot of ginger around. But it's very different from like, you know, Western or European cooking methods, because we tend to just kind of keep it simple. Or, you know, even if you want to say Asian, like we're not very heavy sauce. We're not a very heavy sauce culture like China. We're not a very heavy spice culture like Korea. We do enjoy like some togarashi, which is red chili peppers, and obviously wasabi, right? And ginger. But we tend to get our heat from things like ginger and wasabi more than like chili peppers. There's always been a trend, especially with, you know, dudes or are more kind of adventurous ladies who, you know, want to go and have like the spiciest curry or the spiciest ramen, or, you know, but I think you find that in any culture, right? We find that here with like chili cook-offs and stuff. So you're gonna find chili heads all around the world. So this is still cooking along. Wondering. Okay. So speaking of, you know, similar flavor type stuff, add a little bit of oil here. Just because it looks a little dry. Oh yeah, see that color, better color already. Then to that, I'm gonna add half this cabbage. I think I took a little too much out today. But, you know, when you have things that are like shredded, then you have things that are kind of noodle-y, right? And then if you add something like shirataki to that, then the whole thing just tastes like a plate of noodles, texturally. And one of those things that they talk about in Japanese cooking, but I don't hear it discussed that much here, is how important mouthfeel is. And mouthfeel literally is, how does the food feel in your mouth? Does it feel like, you know, do you have a little crunch? Do you have a little smushiness? Do you have a little chewiness? Do you have a little, you know, bits and pieces? Like, the best dishes, popular opinion, are the dishes that have a little bit of everything. So even when you look at like a burger, you've got like the soft bread, you've got the meaty meat, and then you've got crisp lettuce and tomato, or relish, right? Like, and then you've got cheese if you want that. But you don't really talk about, oh, this burger has this most amazing mouthfeel. Like, you don't hear that a lot. But in Japan, kuchiatari, which is mouthfeel, how it hits your mouth, is important. It's actually part of the whole experience. So, okay, so once I have the cabbage and the onions cooked down, add my garlic, because again, I don't like to burn my garlic. And a fairly, in my case, right, like these things, this is where you get to be like a little bit more personalized. Like, do you like ginger? Do you like garlic? How much garlic do you like? Okay. And once that's cooked in, we're gonna add, so this is mentsuyu or honsuyu, which is a concentrated soup base. I like using it because it's got a little soy, it's got a little mirin, it's got a little sake, and it's such a great kind of base for your sauce to start from. So from here you can add more soy, more, you know, whatever. I like, because I like that kind of teriyaki, sukiyaki flavor, I'm adding just half a packet of an artificial sweetener, just because I personally don't want to add sugar. But if you do want to add sugar, start small. Start with like half a teaspoon, work your way up. And then to that you add the noodles and the beef. And what you basically end up with is something that looks like sukiyaki. When you're at, when you're doing the hot pot, the whole thing is actually usually like in this like really heavy kind of soupy broth, and everything just kind of cooks in it. This is kind of like a drier version of that. Adding a little bit extra ginger. And honsuyu is something that is, because it's a concentrate, you're meant to, you could thin it. This is what I was saying about like earlier. Like you can thin this bottle is, I think it's like $6 or $7 at the Asian market. And you can, I think they might even have this at any place that has soba on sale. So I think like Target, Walmart, they probably have this too, or some version of it. It's a concentrate, so you're meant to thin it out. So if you thin it out a lot, then you could use it as a tempura broth or soba broth. If you leave it kind of solid, not solid, but like, concentrated, you can add other flavors to it and becomes like a loose teriyaki sauce, which makes it amazing for dishes like sukiyaki. And obviously, like a traditional sukiyaki would have other, you could add other vegetables. Shabu shabu would have other things in it too. Like you can add mushrooms, like shiitake mushrooms if you wanted. Cabbage is not traditional, but I like putting cabbage in. It's like an extra kind of vegetable. And then you just basically let it simmer in there until all the noodles absorb the broth. And then just at the very end, I add some green onions. Again, so much of this is like, your choice. Do you want a lot of fresh green onions? Do you like that crunch? Do you not like it? And that's our second dish. Super, super easy. I now have more food than I need for one meal. Traditionally, a sukiyaki is something that you would have with rice. In my case, I am skipping the rice. Because even though these noodles are 0 calorie, they are surprisingly filling. So it's one of those things that you just kind of treat like a regular pasta noodle. And see, I even have a bunch of stuff left over. And so I think a bag of these is like a couple of dollars, and then everything else that you put in there is fairly inexpensive too. You get 2, best part, you can kind of just slide the stove away. You get 2 amazing dishes that taste similar but different. This is sukiyaki, so it's like a very sweet soy kind of sauce and has that kind of more Japanese flavor. Whereas like this, it really does have this kind of Korean sesame seed and salt, just natural, beef flavor, savory dish. So you can do both. In my case, I'm gonna go and have lunch. But I don't know which one I want to start with, so I will talk to you guys later. I hope you have an amazing week.